I started in coal mining, and in my first months I was privileged to spend 2 weeks underground being trained in rescuing myself if we had a disaster, understanding what the men did, and they were all men. It was against the law for women to work underground, which was kind of odd because it was women who were the coal miners during the war. But after the war, the law was passed that they weren't allowed to work underground, which is very odd. And I was doing that because I was a mathematician and economist, and my job involved helping colliery managers run their pits well. And when I went on the leadership program with colliery managers, which was a fantastic program where I learned all about leadership, humbling. These colliery managers would run a business with 2,000 people underground, depending on them for their lives, with capital equipment worth what would now be hundreds and hundreds of millions. And negotiating with the miners. You know, these were extraordinary men. And yet, on that program, we were split into separate groups, and there were 4 groups and 4 women, and Mrs. Thatcher had just been elected. And the men all thought that leadership was like Mrs. Thatcher. And over the course of this program, they came to understand that actually here were 4 women who were completely different, and we each had our leadership style. And the most touching thing that any of them said to me at the end was, "Oonagh, I've never worked with a woman, except maybe as a secretary, but I hope when my daughter grows up, she's like you." Fast forward 8 years and the coal miners' strike, and I was doing IT strategy for the industry and energy strategy and lots of interesting things. But the worst thing I did when I came home to my desk at the end of the day was I had to deal with all the correspondence to the chairman and from MPs about the strike and the terrible situation that so many families were in. And I decided I wanted to leave, and I went to the city. And I joined a strategy consulting practice within what is now Deloitte, and I started advising lawyers. And I found that, unlike most people apparently, I had a great affinity with lawyers, and I loved working with them. And I started advising them on their strategy, on what their clients wanted. I talked to their clients, and on their governance. And I particularly advised them that as I'd got to know them, I realized they really didn't know how to run their partnerships as businesses. They'd grown very fast, and these firms had been 20 partners, and now they'd grown and they were allowed to be much bigger, and these firms were 50, 100 partners, and you know, were 300, 400, 500 people, and that's a very different business to run. So I told them that they should all have proper chief executives and people who knew how to run their business. And then I waved goodbye and I went off to America to join a big strategy firm there. And it wasn't long before I got the call from one of those law firm clients to say, "Oonagh, would you like to come back and put your career on the line and be our chief executive?" I couldn't say no. So that was 1988. And I was actually, now I realise, I was the first woman, but also the first non-lawyer to be the chief executive of a law firm. In some ways it was an awful lot easier in the 80s because there were very few of us. And when there are only a few and you go along and you're pregnant and you need to have some time off, or you just have some family crisis, you know, my experience was I was valued for who I was, and so people adapted and found a way to make it work. Nowadays, there's lots and lots of women. You can't do that. You have to treat people consistently and equally, and so you have to have policies, and policies pigeonhole. They, you know, one size doesn't fit all. So that has made it a lot harder to be really fair and find a way to be fair among women. But everywhere I go in the government, I find these extraordinary women who could have been partners at the Magic Circle firms, some of them trained there, but they've chosen to come into the government legal department And and when I ask them, and I run workshops and ask them why, because you don't get paid, very much at all, they come because it's the work, because it is so exciting. Even before Brexit, it is exciting work. Whatever you're working on is probably in the headlines, and you can dine out on it. We already are very gender balanced. In our top 30, it's 57% women. In our top 160, it's 48%. And across the whole of the government legal department, it's 48%. We've got lots of women now, but the change is, will they work together? That's the change I think we're beginning to see now, women working together to help each other.